For decades, the whole idea was pretty simple. A connected world is a more efficient world. But that idea, it's starting to crack. Today, we're going to dig into a huge fundamental shift happening in the global economy, one that's being driven by these two massive forces, geopolitics and technology. So, let's dive right in.
So let's just start with a big what if. What if that old map we've all been using, the one with all the smooth, predictable trade routes, is being totally torn up and redrawn right in front of us? Because, well, that's pretty much what's happening. And it's forcing absolutely everyone, from huge governments to multinational companies, to figure out a new way to get around.
And this slide, it lays out the change perfectly. We're leaving behind that era of old globalization. You remember it, integrated, predictable, and just obsessed with efficiency. Now we're in a whole new reality. It's fragmented, it's way more strategic, and the main goal isn't just efficiency first anymore. Now it's all about being resilient. And that open, frictionless flow of stuff? Yeah, that's become conditional. And sometimes it's even being used as a weapon.
So what in the world is causing such a massive shift? Well, the main driver is like a political earthquake, where all the tools of economics are no longer just for creating growth. They've become weapons in a global power play.
And here's the absolute core of it. Things like trade, finance, and technology, they're not neutral anymore. Not at all. They're being actively used as leverage in this growing competition between the major world powers. This isn't just some passing storm, you guys. This is the new climate for the global economy.
And here's what that weaponization actually looks like in the real world. You're seeing these intense tariffs and all this new scrutiny on exports coming out of Southeast Asia. We're seeing sanctions slapped on strategic resources like Venezuelan oil. Even immigration policy is being used as a tool. A proposed $100,000 fee for a single work visa. And these local content rules are basically acting as alignment filters. They're forcing companies to pick a side in their own supply chains.
Now, what's so fascinating is seeing how the two biggest players are tackling this, especially in a key battleground like Southeast Asia. On one side, you have the U.S. strategy, which is all about leverage and conditions, with policies that can feel a little unpredictable, maybe even reversible, depending on politics back home. But China, they're playing the long game. They are focused on deep economic integration, embedding themselves through consistent long-term trade deals like the big ASEAN-China free trade area. Okay, so you have this huge political earthquake, right? Well, what happens after an earthquake? You get aftershocks. And the first major ripple from all this is a massive, almost frantic scramble to reorganize the world's supply chains.
The phrase you're going to hear everywhere is supply chain rebalancing, and it's really important to get what this means. This isn't just about finding a backup plan. No, this is a total redesign from the ground up. It's about strategically spreading out your production across a bunch of different countries so you're not dangerously dependent on any one single place, especially China.
And this quote from Neil Shering at Chatham House just hits the nail on the head. All the trade drama and the pandemic, it was like a giant stress test, and it revealed all these hidden choke points in our supply chains that nobody was paying attention to. Suddenly, these little weak spots became huge, system-wide risks.
So for most companies, the journey has been kind of like a three-act play. First, there's the shock. Tariffs and the pandemic suddenly expose the massive risk of having all your eggs in the China basket. That shock leads to the strategy. Companies start adopting a China Plus One model. The idea isn't to leave China, but to add a second major hub. And for so many of them, that plus one destination is Southeast Asia.
And it's not like the whole region is doing the same thing. No, it's way more specialized. Within that ASEAN group, you've got different countries playing different roles. Vietnam is becoming a monster hub for electronics and consumer goods. Thailand is the anchor for the regional auto industry, and you have Indonesia using its natural resources to become a huge player in batteries and electric vehicles. It's a whole network, not just one big factory.
But hold on. If that whole geopolitical mess wasn't enough to deal with, at the exact same time, another massive wave of disruption is hitting us. And that wave is artificial intelligence.
And listen to this. The head of the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, she did not pull any punches. She described AI's impact on jobs as a tsunami. So we're not talking about a gentle tide of change here. This is a huge, powerful force that is going to completely reshape how we all work.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because there's this huge gap between the hype and the reality. On one hand, you see these studies showing mind-blowing productivity gains on specific tasks. Up to 67% for junior staff. But then, when you zoom out and try to figure out what this means for the entire economy, well, the estimates are all over the map. They range from a tiny, tiny bump of 0.07% to almost a full percentage point a year. There's a ton of uncertainty about how all these little wins add up to big growth.
And if you want a number that'll really make you stop and think, here it is. The IMF is estimating that 40%, 40, of all jobs in emerging markets could be impacted by AI. We're not just talking about making jobs better, we're talking about massive displacement and change that these economies might not be ready to handle.
So, what happens when you smash these two giant forces together, this geopolitical earthquake and this AI tsunami? Well, you don't get a flatter, more connected world. You get one that's a lot more uneven.
And here's the big, maybe even a little scary takeaway. These twin disruptions happening at the same time are creating what you could call a great divergence. Instead of emerging economies catching up, there's a very real risk that the gap between the haves and have-nots is about to get a whole lot wider.
This slide just perfectly summarizes why emerging economies are in such a tough spot. They're getting hit from all sides. They're more vulnerable to energy price shocks caused by conflict. They're seeing less foreign investment because of all the uncertainty. They have these huge gaps in AI readiness, everything from infrastructure to skills. And on top of all that, they're facing that massive labor disruption from automation. It's like a perfect storm of problems.
And this chart, it's the picture that's worth 1,000 words. It shows a simulation by the Bank for International Settlements. And what it found is that if AI drives a steady productivity boost, over 10 years, the GDP in advanced economies would grow more than 2% relative to emerging markets. Basically, if those readiness gaps don't close, AI can end up driving inequality, not helping everyone catch up.
Okay, so after all of that, where does this leave us? What's the main takeaway for anyone, a business, a government that's trying to find their way in this new fractured world?
The old playbook? You can pretty much throw it out. The strategic goal has totally changed. It is no longer about just picking up a factory and moving it from one country to another. The new game is all about building these complex, resilient production networks that are spread out across multiple countries. The name of the game is long-term stability now, not just short-term savings.
Which really brings us to our final question, and it's the one that I think is going to define the entire next decade for the global economy. In this new, fractured, AI-driven world we find ourselves in, have we finally reached the point where being resilient is actually more important than being efficient? Definitely something to think about.